Imagine a country so massive that when the sun rises in one city, it's already setting in another, 11 time zones away. Welcome to Russia, a nation spanning 17 million square kilometers, making it nearly twice the size of the United States or China combined. But here's the twist. This colossal landmass is both Russia's greatest superpower and its most debilitating weakness. The very geography that has protected this nation from conquest is the same force slowly strangling its potential. This is the paradox that has shaped Russian history, dictated its wars, and will determine its future. The blessing, a fortress of resources and depth. Stand on Russia's western border and look east. What you're seeing is nature's most elaborate defense system, 9,000 kilometers of continental sprawl stretching all the way to the Pacific Ocean. This isn't just land, it's strategic depth on a scale no other nation possesses. When Napoleon's Grand Army of 600,000 men marched into Russia in 1812, they didn't just face soldiers, they faced distance itself. The French advanced deeper and deeper into Russian territory, watching their supply lines stretch like rubber bands about to snap. The Russians retreated, burning crops and villages as they went, turning the vastness into a weapon. By the time Napoleon reached Moscow, he'd already lost more men to hunger, disease, and exhaustion than to actual combat. The winter that followed, the one everyone remembers, merely finished what geography had started. Of those 600,000 invaders, fewer than 100,000 made it home. Fast forward to 1941. A different tyrant, Adolf Hitler, studied Napoleon's failure and convinced himself he'd learned the lesson. His Wehrmacht would move faster, strike harder, and beat the Russian winter. But here's what Hitler didn't account for. Russia doesn't just defend itself with weather. It defends itself with sheer, incomprehensible space. German tanks rolled forward, capturing territory at an astonishing pace, yet Moscow always seemed just out of reach. Another 100 kilometers, another 500, another 1,000. The Soviets used the same tactic. Trade space for time. They relocated entire factories eastward, beyond the Ural Mountains, piece by piece, worker by worker. By the time Hitler's forces reached the outskirts of Moscow and Stalingrad, they were exhausted, overextended, and trapped in the very depth they'd tried to conquer. This strategic depth isn't Russia's only geographic blessing. Beneath those endless stretches of taiga and tundra lie some of Earth's most valuable treasures. Russia holds the world's largest natural gas reserves, a staggering 32% of the global total. It's the second largest oil producer on the planet. It has the third largest coal reserves, massive deposits of iron ore, gold, diamonds, nickel and timber reserves, larger than Brazil and Canada combined. These resources create something every nation craves: self-sufficiency. While other countries depend on complex global supply chains, Russia can, in theory, feed itself, fuel itself, and arm itself entirely from domestic sources. This abundance translates directly into geopolitical leverage. When Europe needs natural gas during harsh winters, they're calling Russian suppliers. When global markets demand minerals and metals, Russian mines are filling the orders. The land doesn't just protect Russia, it enriches it. And then there's agriculture. Russia's western regions, particularly the southern breadbasket areas in places like Rostov and Stavropol, possess some of the most productive farmland in the northern hemisphere. These regions have made Russia one of the world's top wheat exporters, shipping millions of tons annually and wielding food as soft power across the Middle East and Africa. The curse: frozen wastelands and impossible distances. But now flip the map. Look at what all that territorial grandeur actually consists of. Here's the brutal truth that Russian planners confront every day. Most of this empire is utterly inhospitable. 60 to 65% of Russia's territory sits atop permafrost, ground that stays frozen year-round. Much of the rest is taiga, the world's largest forest, stretching endlessly in every direction with temperatures that routinely plunge to -40 degrees Celsius in winter. Of those 17 million square kilometers, only about 13% is arable land suitable for growing crops. Compare that to a country like the United States, where roughly 44% of land can support agriculture. Russia's growing season in most regions is shockingly short, sometimes just a few months between the last frost of spring and the first freeze of autumn. The southern wheat belt can produce abundantly in good years, but it's also vulnerable. In 2025, severe droughts hit Rostov, Russia's top wheat-producing region, slashing output by 30% and triggering agricultural emergencies. The permafrost presents an even more insidious problem. Try building anything substantial on ground that's frozen solid 9 months of the year and turns into unstable mush during brief summer thaws. Roads buckle, buildings crack, pipelines rupture. According to the Russian Academy of Sciences, Russia has approximately $250 billion worth of physical infrastructure at risk from thawing permafrost. Major oil fields, gas pipelines like the Eastern Siberia-Pacific Ocean route, and critical mining operations all face the very real threat of the ground literally collapsing beneath them. And if you think global warming might solve this problem by melting the permafrost and opening new farmland, think again. Climate scientists warn that warming doesn't create a stable transition, it creates chaos. The soil revealed beneath thawing permafrost tends to be acidic, thin, and poorly suited for cash crops. Even if millions of acres theoretically become available for farming in Siberia, they won't replace the productivity of southern regions that might simultaneously experience increased droughts and desertification. Russia's environment minister suggested that far northern regions could become agricultural within 20 to 30 years. But climate scientists quickly countered that this wishful thinking ignores the nervous climate of unstable extreme weather patterns that accompany warming. The population problem, an empire without people. Here's where Russia's geographic paradox becomes almost comical, if it weren't so serious. This nation controls the largest landmass on Earth, yet where do Russians actually live? Not spread evenly across their vast domain. Not populating Siberia's resource-rich interior. No, 77% of Russia's population crams into the European portion, which represents only 23% of the country's total land area. Let that sink in. 3/4 of Russians live in less than a quarter of Russia. Head east into Siberia, that legendary expanse of over 13 million square kilometers, about 3/4 of Russia's total area, and you'll find fewer than 40 million people. That translates to roughly 3 people per square kilometer, a population density comparable to Mongolia. In some northern regions, it drops below 1 person per square kilometer. Vast cities like Novosibirsk, Krasnoyarsk, and Omsk exist as isolated population centers, but between them stretch hundreds of kilometers of near emptiness. This creates absurd contradictions. Moscow, with over 12 million people, groans under overcrowding and traffic congestion that rivals any megacity. Meanwhile, in resource-rich Siberia, labor shortages cripple development projects. Mining companies struggle to find workers. Infrastructure projects stall because there simply aren't enough people to build or maintain them. Why don't Russians move east? Because Siberia, for all its resources, offers brutal living conditions, limited economic opportunities outside of extractive industries, and profound isolation from Russia's cultural and political centers. Young Russians overwhelmingly migrate toward Moscow, St. Petersburg, and other Western cities, exactly the opposite direction their government wants them to go. The development dilemma, roads to nowhere. Try connecting a nation that stretches 9,000 kilometers from west to east. Every road, every railway, every pipeline must traverse mind-boggling distances across some of the planet's harshest terrain. The Trans-Siberian Railway, completed in 1916, remains an engineering marvel and a logistical nightmare. It's the world's longest railway line, covering over 9,200 kilometers and taking 7 days to traverse. The costs are staggering. Russian railways invested over $8.5 billion in 2019 alone just to maintain and marginally improve the existing network. That's roughly $98,000 for every kilometer of track. And that's just maintenance. Building new high-speed rail, like the proposed Moscow-Kazan line, carries a price tag of approximately $25 billion for just 770 kilometers. Pipelines face similar challenges. The Power of Siberia gas pipeline, which carries natural gas from Siberian fields to China, stretches over 3,000 kilometers through mountains, rivers, and permafrost zones. These projects generate billions in revenue once operational, but upfront costs and ongoing maintenance in such extreme conditions consume enormous resources. The result? Many of Russia's eastern cities are more economically and logistically connected to Asian neighbors, particularly China, than to their own capital. Vladivostok, Russia's largest Pacific port, sits just 134 kilometers from North Korea and 45 kilometers from China. Goods from China can reach Vladivostok far faster and cheaper than goods from Moscow. The same pattern repeats in Khabarovsk and other Far Eastern cities, creating an odd dynamic where Russia's east looks economically toward Beijing while remaining politically tethered to Moscow. This geographic isolation makes developing Siberia a catch-22. You need infrastructure to encourage people to move there. But infrastructure costs are prohibitive unless there are people there to justify it. Russia has tried special economic zones, tax incentives, and investment partnerships with China, yet the fundamental problem remains. Distance and cold make development exponentially more expensive than in any comparable nation. Climate change, opportunity or catastrophe? As global temperatures rise, the Arctic is warming at more than double the global average. For Russia, this presents what might seem like opportunity. The Northern Sea route, which hugs Russia's Arctic coastline from the Barents Sea to the Bering Strait, is becoming increasingly navigable. This route cuts the distance from Rotterdam to Yokohama from 27 days via the Suez Canal down to just 20 days. Russia sees this as a geopolitical game-changer, a chance to control a major global shipping corridor, project power in the Arctic, and extract resources from previously inaccessible regions. Since 2007, parts of the Northern Sea route have been temporarily ice-free in late summer. Within the next decade, complete late-season meltouts could become routine, opening the route for much of the year. But the Northern Sea route remains unpredictable. Ice-free periods vary wildly from year to year, sometimes 6 weeks, sometimes several months. Ships require expensive icebreaker escorts, driving up costs. Schedule unreliability makes it nearly impossible for companies to depend on the route for just-in-time global supply chains. And then there's the darker side of warming. That thawing permafrost we mentioned earlier, it's accelerating. By 2050, up to 45% of Russia's Arctic hydrocarbon extraction fields could suffer severe damage from ground instability. Buildings tilt, runways crack. In 2020, a fuel storage tank near Norilsk collapsed due to thawing permafrost, spilling 20,000 tons of diesel into Arctic rivers, one of the largest environmental disasters in Russian history. The thawing permafrost also releases massive amounts of stored carbon, up to 1,500 billion metric tons of organic carbon, nearly twice what's currently in Earth's atmosphere. As this carbon escapes as CO2 and methane, it accelerates global warming in a vicious feedback loop. Russia, the fourth largest greenhouse gas emitter, finds itself both victim and perpetrator of climate change. Strategic implications: the vulnerable giant. So what does all this geography mean for Russia's future? On paper, Russia looks like a superpower. It has nuclear weapons, vast resources, strategic depth that has repelled history's greatest conquerors, and landmass that dwarfs rivals. But look closer. Russia's borders stretch over 20,000 kilometers, the longest of any nation. Defending such immense frontiers is nearly impossible. The collapse of the Soviet Union stripped away buffer states that once provided strategic depth in the West. NATO now sits within 100 miles of St. Petersburg, compared to 1,000 miles during the Cold War. Moscow is roughly 500 miles from NATO territory, down from 1,300 miles. This loss of buffer zones terrifies Russian strategic planners. It's why Russia fought wars in Georgia and Ukraine, not primarily about ideology or NATO expansion, but about maintaining strategic depth. Without those buffer territories, Russia's western heartland, where the bulk of its population and economic power resides, sits dangerously exposed. In the south, the Caucasus Mountains provide natural barriers, but instability in regions like Chechnya and Dagestan poses internal threats. Russia must maintain control over a vast multi-ethnic empire where separatist sentiments simmer beneath the surface. In the east, those empty Siberian expanses face a different challenge: China. Chinese investment in Russia's Far East is growing rapidly. Infrastructure projects, special economic zones, and resource extraction increasingly depend on Chinese capital and labor. Some Russians worry quietly about demographic realities, millions of Chinese living just across the border from sparsely populated Russian territory that once belonged to the Qing dynasty. The inescapable paradox. Russia's geography is both fortress and prison. The same vast distances that saved it from Napoleon and Hitler make development staggeringly expensive. The same permafrost that preserves immense carbon stores threatens infrastructure worth hundreds of billions. The same Arctic that promises new shipping routes releases climate-accelerating greenhouse gases. The same size that makes Russia a giant leaves most of it empty and vulnerable. No nation in history has faced quite this combination of geographic blessing and curse. Russia cannot escape its geography. It can only navigate the impossible trade-offs it creates. As climate change accelerates, as global power shifts east, and as resources become ever more critical, Russia's geographic paradox will only intensify. The question isn't whether Russia's size is an advantage or disadvantage. The question is whether Russia can ever reconcile the two.